Okay, welcome everyone. A lot of new faces to the Open Planetary Launch, whatever day this is, November 17th, 2020. I'm Chase Millian. To the new people, thank you for joining us. We also have an Open Planetary Slack that I encourage you to join if you're people interested in planetary data. It is sometimes lively, and we have a lot of experts there on how to work with planetary data, including Emily. So our speaker today is Emily Lakdawalla, who everyone knows. She is the author of this book, which I thought I would plug. It has tabs in it because I actually use it as a reference in my research. And she'll be speaking today about planetary data image processing. So thank you for being here, Emily, and go ahead when you're ready.
All right, thank you, Chase. Can everybody hear me fine? Give me a thumbs up, Chase, if it's good. All right, excellent. So this is a talk that I've given a couple times before. It's really designed for professionals who work with planetary science data. And I want to introduce you to this worldwide community of people who approach planetary data in a slightly different way, with different questions and different goals. Before I proceed into the body of the talk, I'd like to just make a couple of announcements. First of all, I am a co-chair on the NASA Planetary Data Ecosystem Independent Review Board. I'm co-chairing something called the Searching Subcommittee, and we are seeking input from people who have ever looked for anything, any kind of planetary data, and and encountered barriers to your searches. And I would love to hear from you about what you are trying to do and what you were able to do and what you weren't able to do. So if you could, please send me an email about your successes and challenges with searching for planetary data of any kind. It will become part of the public record if you do contact me, but it's okay if you want me to anonymize your input, I can do that and just put it all as part of a big document without your name on it. So I welcome input from all comers, any level of experience with planetary data, whether absolutely new or experienced user. The other housekeeping item is a note on image credit. NASA data is in the public domain, but anything that people produce from that, any derived products, is not necessarily in the public domain. In fact, a lot of it is not. And so the images that I share in my talks are shared with the permission of the people who did the processing, and it's important always to give credit where it's due. So keep that in mind if you ever want to use any of the images that are processed by the amateur data artist community. So to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from, I think my interest in planetary science started around 1986 when Voyager flew past Uranus. And we got these images back that, looking at them today, they're not all that impressive, but they were, to me, I think, very striking. They were brand new worlds that we'd never seen before. They had terrific names like Miranda, Ariel, this is Umbriel, this is Oberon, here's Titania. They're all, they fired my imagination, and I just absolutely fell in love with these images. And everywhere I could look for books on space, I would look for images of all of these wonderful moons of the outer solar system. Fast forward to 1997, and there is this brand new medium called the World Wide Web, on which the Mars Pathfinder missions shared their images as they came down from the spacecraft. I was a school teacher at this time, and I remember sitting after school at the corner at the one computer we had in our classroom to download very slowly these enormous images. Look, there's one that was a whole 124K, and it took so long to download, but it was worth it because it was a brand new image from Mars. And because the mission was sharing these images so fast, I felt like I could, I could check in every day and see what the mission was doing. I was part of the adventure. That was a great year for planetary science. Galileo was returning some fabulous images of Jupiter's moons. We had WIFPIC 2 returning images of worlds throughout the solar system. And so it's all of these things inspired me to ask, I'd been a geology major in college, they inspired me to ask if I could do geology in space, which I could. And so I went to graduate school to study space geology. My project was to work on Magellan. This is a Magellan image of Venus. In my study area, Baltus Vallis on Venus is the little squiggly line running down the center of this image. It's an 1,800 kilometer long dry lava channel that winds its way across the surface of Venus. And while doing this work, I made a discovery that would change my life. The discovery was not exactly about Venus. The discovery was the fact that all of the images that, first of all, that there were many, many more images from spacecraft than I had ever seen or heard of before. And second of all, that they were all freely available to the public. Now, I know that everybody who I'm talking to today knows this for a fact, but we all had to discover it for the first time. And I didn't find out until I was in graduate school studying space geology that there was this wealth of planetary data and that it was all there free for the taking. And thanks to the new medium of the internet, and thanks to increasing speed of home connections, these kinds of images were suddenly accessible to the entire world. And I just thought this was so fabulous that I found my calling. I wanted to share these kinds of pictures with the world. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it, but it was something that I really wanted to do with my life. And just look at the space jellyfish on Venus. I mean, these images are absolutely incredible. I could just, Brown University, where I went, had a regional planetary image facility. And so they had enormous metal cases full of gigantic prints, photographic prints of every image returned from Venus, every image returned from lunar orbiter, all the Apollo data. It was all there. And when I was supposed to be doing work, I would just go to the RPIF, go into the library, pull open a random cabinet and just browse a planet. And it was the most wonderful experience. And I know that RPIF's regional planetary image facilities are a little bit under threat right now, and I hope they get preserved because there's nothing quite like interacting directly with enormous cabinets full of photographic prints. All right, so after grad school, I was trying to figure out how I could possibly do this kind of work, teach people about all the great things that missions were doing and share all those great images. I worked for a rather unsatisfying year as an environmental consultant, and then I found a job at the Planetary Society, where I worked until just a couple of months ago, so for 19 years. I was there on a project that I'll explain in a second. I got there in 2001, which was a fabulous time also in space exploration. Deep Space One flew past Borelli. Cassini was just returning its very first images of Saturn. We had Mars Odyssey had arrived at Mars, and there were count them, two spacecraft at Mars at the same time. Can you even imagine what a wealth of data that would provide? We had Stardust flying past Wilt 2 and got this wonderful image of this funky looking comet with the footprints all across its surface. It was just fabulous. So something happened that year also behind the scenes that would revolutionize public communication of space exploration. That's when these two young guys, Steve Squires on the left and Jim Bell on the right, decided that they wanted to post all of the images from the Mars Exploration Rover mission onto the internet as soon as they hit Earth. They wanted to make it part of the data pipeline, that when the images came into JPL, when they came into the image processing laboratory there, that there would be an automated process that would spit them out onto the web right away. People asked them, are you worried about being scooped? And they said, no, because the public paid for this data. They deserve access to it. We're the scientists. We know what the mission is doing science-wise, but this is also about an exploration adventure, and we want to make sure that the public can join us for it. And so they actually did that. And here are some of the very first images returned from the Spirit mission, Spirit rover on Mars, taken even before the mast had stood up and in order to raise the cameras up above the surface of the planet. And they were spit directly to the web, just as promised. And so people often would, throughout the missions, would get a chance to see these images even before people working on the missions did. And so it immediately generated a devoted worldwide community of fans who met on this in many places, but one of the primary places was a website called Unmanned Spaceflight.com, which was originally created as a website for people to share their excitement about the Beagle 2 lander, which failed, but they pivoted quickly to the Mars Exploration Rover mission. By the way, this website was initially created by Doug Ellison, who was then a medical animator in, I believe, Leicester in the UK. And he is now working on at JPL as on the ECAMs. He's actually doing ops for Curiosity, among many other things that he does there. So that's one fascinating story of a complete career change, and it's not the only one in this community. So anyway, this is an example of one of the international communities that sprung up around those newly shared raw images from the missions. And they would do things like say, look, take a look at these images that just got returned yesterday. Look at that gigantic dust devil. And this guy, Marco Di Lorenzo, who is an Italian fan, might see this before overnight, before the American mission staff woke up, and that was just fine. It was part of the excitement. And they would often put together animations or mosaics even before everybody back in the US had woken up. At this time, I wasn't yet aware of this community. I was still working behind the scenes on an education project that was linked with the MER missions. So the experiment was so successful for JPL that they began to do it with several other missions, including Cassini. So Cassini arrived at Saturn in the summer of 2004, although they'd been putting images on the web before then. As they approached, they began their automated pipeline after orbit insertion when they arrived at Saturn in June of 2004. The Mars exploration rovers were already in their extended missions by that point, and who knew if they would last very long, but at least we had this new wealth of data from the Cassini mission that was supposed to last longer. Of course, it turns out Opportunity and Cassini lasted about the same length of time. So Cassini was sharing all these amazing images, and I just had so much fun diving into all that data, sharing it, interpreting it, posting it on the Planetary Society's website. Here's an example of what that looked like at this time. And I began to show people how they could use these images and process them, make color versions, make mosaics. I began to try to teach my readers about how they could play with this kind of image data. So about 6 months later, I was sent to the European Space Operations Center in Darmstadt because the Planetary Society had run an international art contest for people to submit artworks to predict what the surface of Titan was going to look like when Huygens landed. This was, and we actually had two prizes. One was given out before the landing, and then one was given out after the landing for the person who had gotten it most right. And this was the guy who won that particular contest, because it was pretty amazing rendition of what the sky looked like and everything after Huygens landed. So I was representing the Planetary Society for this contest, but I was also serving double duty as a reporter tasked with reporting on the progress of the Huygens mission. So, and the screen is intentionally left blank because while we were at ESOC, we waited and we waited and we waited and we waited for the Huygens images to be released. There was a VIP reception, there was a multi-course dinner with wine and lots of speeches, congratulations of lots of government ministers. Most of the press weren't seated at tables. They were kind of in a peanut gallery at the back of the room, because the press room was across the corridor from the giant room where they were conducting this. And during the dinner, the press began to hypothesize that maybe something had gone terribly wrong with Huygens because there weren't any images. They'd heard a rumor of some kind of radio communication problem, and they were saying, oh, maybe there weren't any images. But then briefly during the reception, they flashed this image on the screen and then it went away. And everybody in the room just, there's this electric sort of jump. Oh my God, look at that amazing image that was returned from Huygens. What was it? It looked like rivers. And but the speechifying continued, and there was still no image release on the web, and the rumors were flying in the press room. After the dinner was over, I was back in the press room at my computer, and somebody sent me to a link to this website on the University of Arizona website that said, and now without further ado or commentary, the Descent Imager and Spectral Radiometer team on Huygens proudly present images from Titan. And here was a website containing, look at that, 37 pages with 10 image triplets apiece, the entire data set from Huygens. The reason this was at University of Arizona was because the camera team was led by University of Arizona researchers. So it made sense that it was coming out of the University of Arizona, but it was clearly not something that the European Space Agency had expected to be released. The internet went nuts. Everybody downloaded all the data and started assembling their own versions of mosaics. So here's a very early one that was assembled by Daniel Crotty that you can see how all of these Titan rivers interface together. Here was another one by Christian Waldvogel that started looking at those side-looking images and trying to assemble the horizon. These images appeared on the internet within, I think, just a couple of hours of the data set having been released. Meanwhile, the next morning, this was what was released formally by the mission. And by that time, this was what was available on the fan community websites that had sprung up around these newly released images. And throughout this international community of space fans, there was just joy and amazement and gratitude that the images had been shared in this way so that everybody could partake in the fun and the thrill of discovering this brand new world never before seen by human eyes all at the same time. Now, back to me in the press room. I knew that the release had not been approved, but the cat was out of the bag. The images were absolutely amazing. So I decided I really ought to begin sharing them, but I was concerned about doing that because I knew that the data really wasn't supposed to be public. So I sent some emails to the mission folks telling them that the data release had been an absolutely wonderful thing. They did try to take the data down. They took it down for a little while, but it was clear that the data was all over the internet and that there was really nothing for it except to put it back up and take responsibility and claim responsibility for how beautiful and wonderful a data set it was. And it was just marvelous to see the internet response to that. So when this was all over, after I'd recovered from the week-long flu that everybody who had gone to the Huygens landing suffered, I started looking into what this community was, who these people were, and how I could help them do the kind of work that they'd been doing with that data set. After a little while of investigating this community, I decided that there's two main different groups of members of the public who like to play with space image data. There are artists and there are explorers. I'll talk about the artists first. So the artists are asking with the data, what would it look like if I were there? They want to imagine themselves in the place of the spacecraft, looking with their human eyes on all of these landscapes and wondering, just what it would be like to travel to all of these wonderful places in space. As scientists, when we process images, we're often looking to emphasize subtle differences in the data or bring out details that are otherwise hard to see. You stretch contrast, you enjoy parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that are better able to differentiate the different materials that are present. So when scientists process and release images, you might get images like this. So these are two different images of Venus that are very commonly reproduced. I took them both from NASA's Planetary Photojournal. And the one on the left is a Magellan mosaic that shows the surface of Venus as seen in radar. It's been colorized orange. I've heard various reasons, explanations for why they colored it that color. But it's a grayscale data, or it's a monochrome data set because it's not even an image data set. It's a radar data set. On the right, we have an image of Venus from Galileo that it took during its flyby. It was taken with a UV filter, so it shows lots of cloud features that are actually invisible if you were to view them just in regular visible light spectrum. And it's been colorized blue to represent the fact that it came from a short wavelength part of the spectrum. It was from an ultraviolet part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Here is a member of the amateur community's attempt to take Mariner 10 data and produce a more realistic version of what Venus looks like. Even this is too colorful. Matthias Malmer wanted to take the data and show you some of what you can see in the Mariner 10 data, some of that cloud detail, but he didn't want to push it and overemphasize it. He wanted to make an image that looked like a planet. That didn't look like something quite so garish or colorful as the images that you can get out of photojournal. This one's a bit more realistic. This is actually a true color RGB image of Venus from Messenger. And this is what it would look like actually if you were there. It would just be a very bright white, nearly featureless globe. And it answers that question. What would it look like if you were there? Venus is a cue ball. It doesn't look like that orange thing or that blue thing that many people often download from the photojournal to represent Venus in their in their various publications or presentations. Here's another example. These are two images of Neptune and Uranus taken from Voyager. They are RGB color combos. Of course, Voyager had optics that were not very sensitive to the red end of the spectrum, so it's only partially representative of what the human eye could see. And it actually may be taken through filters that aren't even green and blue filters. Often there's a green and a violet filter used to make these images. But everybody knows that Neptune and Uranus are blue, so these images seem true in terms of how they represent those two planets to us. But Bjorn Johnson took the Voyager data set and very, very carefully processed a set of images with a goal of showing them both, processing both sets of images the same way so that we could actually compare side by side the perceptual colors of the two planets. And this is what he came up with. The difference between the two is much more subtle. And of course, there's even less difference now because we're close to, we've just passed through an equinox, and Uranus has a lot more cloud features now than it used to. So the planets are really much more similar than they're often represented. And let's not even talk about this Voyager photo of Saturn, which is often reproduced. I did once ask one of my friends in the community to produce a true color version from a similar time, and here's what that would look like, taken at the same time by Voyager as it approached, just processed in order to try to come up with what a human eye would perceive. And I just really like flipping between those two, so you can see. I'm not sure. It's gorgeous. It's really interesting, but it's not what the human eye would see if you were there. And there are consequences to sharing images that have those more garish colors. So you can go down to your local Joann Fabrics and you can buy this fabric at Joann that has all the planets on it. And you can recognize all those images that I showed you as graphic elements in this fabric, especially that Saturn. But you can see Venus is actually, it's orange, but with the cloud features that you can see in the Galileo image. So actually, I feel like somebody who knows a lot about planets actually designed this fabric. It's kind of fun. And I just have to show you that my mom actually made a baby blanket for my first daughter out of that fabric. All right, so here is one of the montages that I put together while I was working at the Planetary Society. That's an attempt to show the solar system a lot more like what all of those worlds would look like if you could see them with your own eyes. The colors are much more muted, subtle, and I find it to be pleasing and peaceful in a way that the scientifically processed data is not. And I'm not saying that one way of doing image processing is better than another way. There's very good reasons for the way that scientists process their image data. It's just that their goals are different. Artists are trying to represent a scene, a place. They're trying to evoke a feeling of being there. And scientists are trying to pull information out of the data. And so because you have different goals, you'll process things in different ways. The scientist images are going to be the ones that are inside a publication, and the amateur or the public processed image, the data artist processed images, are going to be the ones that you want to put on the cover of your magazine. So what do these people need? Obviously, they need data itself. They need access to all the data, and they need metadata as well so that they understand what they're looking at, what distances are, what lighting circumstances are. They need to know the absolute reflectance in images so that they can make true color images, so that they know how one filter image relates to another filter image. They need browse tools to make that data and metadata more accessible. They need batch download tools that makes it easy to get the data that they want. And they need processing tools to make it easy to get derived products out of the data. And I've long been an advocate for actually hosting calibrated or reprojected versions of data products, because even though the planetary data system has information about how to calibrate data, it's pretty inaccessible for most people who are not active planetary science researchers. So it's a lot better, in my view, for accessibility for the broader public and to help people like these data artists, as well as just members of the general public, if there are versions of data sets available that are already calibrated, already processed to absolute reflectance, already projected to common image projections, or have their geometric distortion removed so that it's easier to work with the image data, mosaic it, do whatever you overlay one kind of data on another. There are a few places that are doing a really great job with this, making data accessible to the public. The Ring Moon Systems node, I should now say, has a fabulous search engine called Opus that makes the data really easy to drill down into, find exactly what you want, and download what you need. They have also created a calibrated and geometrically projected, geometrically corrected version of the Voyager data sets. And so that makes that whole data set a lot more accessible than it used to be. Arizona State University has a really good website that provides multiple points of access into lots of Mars orbiter data. The analyst notebooks at the PDS Geosciences node are fun tools for browsing not just the images from landed missions, but also lots of the metadata, the conversations that were happening on the mission around the events that were happening as images were being taken. And then there are also community created products like Midnight Planets, which for a long time was the space enthusiast community favorite way to get access to the Mars Exploration Rover and Mars Science Laboratory data. Here's a little look at what Opus looks like, and it does a wonderful thing with the data. It actually serves colored versions of the thumbnails that were taken through different color filters. So there are distinct color washes applied to each thumbnail depending on what color filter it was taken through, which makes it just so much easier to quickly find what kind of data you're looking for. A brief mention that the amateur and professional communities have different use when it comes to what raw and archival data means. Among amateurs, raw data sets refer to the kinds that get rapidly released to the web, like those that were released on the Spirit and Opportunity missions and on Curiosity. They're usually rapidly released, they're uncalibrated, they haven't been flat fielded. In the case of the Curiosity Mastcam data, it's actually kind of awful because a lot of the data is now transmitted to Earth losslessly, which means that the Bayer filter has not been demosaicked to produce color images from the grayscale data. And then when it's shared on the web, on the raw images website, it's shared in JPEG format. So you're JPEG munging this grayscale image that has the Bayer filter pattern on it, and getting color information out of that is a huge mess. So that's something that ought to be fixed, but that's just a minor side rant. It is usually lossy JPEG compressed, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that it makes it more accessible because people can more rapidly browse through it and download it, even on iffy connections. It also makes the data less usable for science. So it helps the mission accomplish outreach without encouraging people to do research right away on the data, which helps to mollify some people who are worried about being scooped on science results if the data gets out there too fast. There are a couple of missions that do share their data in PNG format instead of JPEG format. InSight is one of those, where the images are not intended for science really, they're just there to document what's happening on the mission, and so they go ahead and share the images out in PNG format. Okay. So if you help these people out, what do you get from them? Well, you get gorgeous illustrations, obviously. And as just an example of how the kinds of work that the public, the data artists can do, can really improve upon what I've seen coming out of the actual people working on the missions. Here is the entire Voyager 2 Miranda data set. Miranda is a small moon of Uranus. It's about 500 kilometers across. It has some great geologic features on it. Voyager 2 was moving very fast as it flew past Miranda. It had very low light levels and was trying to transmit data to Earth almost as fast as it acquired it. And so there was a lot of motion between adjacent footprints on the Miranda mosaic. And so it's very, very difficult to assemble. Here are two versions of it that you can download from the Planetary Photojournal. The one on the left was created at about the time of the flyby, so back in the 80s. And you can see that it's an imperfect mosaic because the point of view on Miranda shifted quite a bit, and there were also some data gaps and other issues. The one on the right is a mapping project. It's a mapping product. It's an orthographic projection with the photometrically corrected mosaicked version of the data. And this is the one that you most often see reproduced as a global view of Miranda. But because it's been photometrically corrected, there isn't a lot of shape from shading. It looks weirdly flat. It looks kind of like a pizza. It's a very good mapping product, but it's not a good representation. Neither one of these really looks like Miranda would look in space. And so here's a version mosaicked by Ted Strike, who is a master of working with really gnarly data sets. Now, this is not a scientific product. It's been warped and stretched in very unscientific ways to make things fit together. There's been some data copied in from something lower resolution to fill in a gap. So it's a somewhat fictional product, but it is a much better representation of what Miranda seems like than those other images that were produced by professionals. And so again, different goals, different processes, you make different compromises. And because I'm mentioning Ted, I have to show you one of his other greatest accomplishments, which is what he did with the Venera lander data. So these are two images from one of the Venera landers on Venus. They're taken with a camera that has, it's mounted at an angle, and it's a line scanner. And so at the edges of the image, it looks up at the horizon, so you can see the horizon and part of the sky. And then in the center of the image, it's looking down right at the foot of the spacecraft. And so Ted wanted to make something that would feel like you were standing there on Venus. And this is what he produced. The images, if you compare them to the originals, are, this is very fictional. So it's taking elements from the image, it's taking bits and pieces of the original image and rearranging, reassembling them into something that gives you the feeling of being on that landscape at Venus. It uses the data as an ingredient in his artwork, but it's an artwork. It's a representation of what it would be like to be standing on Venus. And it's marvelous. It's great to have this available, as well as having the original science data available. And it would be awful nice if the Russian Academy of Sciences would make its data more accessible to the general public. Ted got his hands on it many years ago through a lot of back and forth communication with Russian scientists. Here's another thing that Ted Strike posted. This is a Mars 3, it's a Soviet spacecraft, Mars 3 image of Mars taken on its approach. When I saw this, I remarked on Twitter when I shared it that it was the first crescent image of Mars that I'd ever seen. And several people commented to tell me that they thought Viking had also taken crescent face images on approach. So I went to the photojournal and looked for those Viking images. And there is one. Here is a crescent image of Mars from Viking that you can download right now from Photojournal. It is a GIF compressed, downsized version of an image scanned from a printed product. So I said, I think I can probably do better than that. And I went back to the original data, and this is what's there in that original Viking data. It's so beautiful. The Viking data set has this atmospheric quality that I just hadn't appreciated before I went to the data set and found these amazing, wonderful Viking approach images. Not science products, they're just there for documenting the approach, but they are so gorgeous. One final example of what amateurs can do with really awful data. This is the image from Giotto, the Halley's Comet mission that was shared on the BBC that famously so disappointed Margaret Thatcher that she decided to defund planetary exploration by Britain for the next decade or two. Here are versions that were published by the camera's principal investigator, Horst Uwe Keller. And here is a version that was processed by Daniel Mashasek, where you can actually see the shape of Halley's Comet and the jets coming off the nucleus. And look, Halley's Comet's nucleus is duck-shaped, just like Churyumov-Gerasimenko. And here's a version that Gordon Ugarkovich produced after Daniel Mashasek had had his way with the data, where he stabilized the approach animation, and you can follow Giotto all the way into Halley until the camera gets destroyed by a stray particle. And that's it. That's all you got. Here's the kind of thing that I like to produce as illustrations from this kind of data. So here's an example that shows you all the asteroids that we've and comets that have been visited by spacecraft, and also shows you the relative brightnesses and colors, more or less. So these are all things that you get from artists, beautiful illustrations. You also get them really fast. So people can produce things like this enormous mosaic of Curiosity, one of the self-portraits. This was made by Andrew Bodroff within, I think, a couple of hours of all of the images arriving on Earth. And so they work so fast. And I think that missions ought to take advantage of these people more to crowdsource their public relations, their public communication. Please, people, make these gorgeous images, share them on your social networks, get people more excited about the activities that space missions are doing. And so you can use them. They can be very helpful to you, but you do have to remember that they're volunteers. They're volunteers, their time is being very generously given. You can't just write them and make requests for just anything, although some of them are willing to help as they have time. They certainly are, and I've definitely asked people to do work for me in exchange for credit, basically, is all that most of them ever want. And so there's a lot of people out there who are sharing their beautiful work. Thomas, I know, is actually watching this presentation. So here's, I'm sorry, it's a very old snapshot of your Flickr page, Thomas, but it's just as beautiful now. Judy Schmidt is somebody who works with Hubble and other astrophysical data, making just stunning images. And then there are people like Justin who work with every data set imaginable. Right now, the only repository I know that stores all of these images and makes them searchable, not all of them, but some of them, is the Planetary Society's Bruce Murray Space Image Library, which is something that I was setting up while I was there. And it does have a large library of really beautiful images. But first of all, I'm not at the Planetary Society anymore, so I'm not maintaining it. And second of all, the recent content management system update has rendered that website less usable than it used to be. And I think that the community, that there's an opportunity here for the open planetary community to create a well-designed, easy to navigate, easy to search repository for amateur processed images that also serves the community by making sure that everybody gets the credit that they deserve for the images, that helps people establish what kind of rights they're willing to give over reuse of the images. And this is a project I'd be very happy to help with, but I don't code, I don't know how to do that, I don't know how to host, I don't know how to do any of those technical things, and I don't have time. So I can help set it up, and I can help guide the process and interact with the amateur community, but I would need a lot of support and help. It would have to be a group project. So that's the artist community. I mentioned there's also people who I call explorers. These are the people who want to know what's happening now, what's over there, and are we there yet? Have we gotten to the top of the mountain yet? What's going on in the mission right now? And these are the people who hang out on forums like Unmanned Spaceflight, NASA Spaceflight, and other places. They share pictures, they make animations, they make mosaics, they document things, they caption them, they say, oh, look, Curiosity has arrived at that particular sand ripple that we can see from orbit. Look at this distant view. Oh, we can finally see this hill poking out above that other hill again. Or, oh, the sky is finally cleared. They make animations of, they notice things like, look how when Curiosity attempted and failed to drill into a rock here, all the sand vibrated off the surface. And they share really fun things that they observe, quirky things that they observe like that. And they notice things like, oh, that's, I almost forgot why I put this image in here. This image is actually an example of the bravery it takes to be on a mission and to allow this rapid sharing of your data with the web, because this documented one of the first times that Curiosity just completely failed to penetrate a rock with its drill. They were like, we're go for drilling, we're gonna get a sample, and the next morning you look and this is what the rock looks like. And so that is, you know, for the mission, it's a setback. And I think that there's one of the reasons that not all missions are willing to share their image data without any kind of editorial process involved is because of setbacks like this. But the explorers love it. They love knowing that they're witnessing both the challenges and the accomplishments. And they're sitting there, they're not, they're kind of armchair quarterbacking. They're discussing among themselves, how are they going to get out of this situation? What are they going to try to do next? Oh, I think they'll do this. Maybe this rock is uniquely hard. Maybe they'll try another rock. They're being scientists, and they're not, participating in the actual science on the mission, but they're getting to participate in that scientific process of making observations and hypotheses and asking questions and seeing how things will turn out as Curiosity goes through its experiments. So it's been just a wonderful way for the rover missions to invite the public along for not only the adventure, but also the scientific investigations that these spacecraft are doing as they explore Mars. And for Cassini, it was the same thing when Cassini was still active and sending back images. Every new flyby would generate this flurry of discussion about what we were seeing and how it was unexpected. And is this really blue in that particular area, or is it just because of the auto stretch in the images? I don't know, but we can try looking in the PDS and seeing if this data looks the same. So these discussions just go on and on. They feel like scientific discussions because they are. They're not science team discussions, but they're science discussions. Other things that the community does is they make their own maps of the traverses. They have fun doing something that the mission often cannot do, which is to drop drop simulated versions of spacecraft onto actual images from Mars. And so you'll see that they'll create a lot of images like this that really help you understand the scale of the landscape. You put a model of the rover in there and you understand the scale. But you know what makes it easier to understand the scale is if you put a human in there. And this is something that NASA would never do, I think for good reason, because it's so easy to accidentally give the impression that there actually has been a human astronaut on Mars. So even when I shared these on the Planetary Society's website, I edited them to put in a caption at the bottom of the image that would include the words "artist concept of an astronaut to scale with Murray Butts." In this case, the artist is Sean Doran. But look at how much, how it helps you to understand the scale and the perspective of this landscape, having that model of the astronaut in there. Isn't that cool? Okay, so what do these people want? They want raw images, and in terms of the definition of raw images that I shared before about those rapidly released automated pipeline right to the web, they want them right away. The longer the delay there is between the arrival of the images and their original arrival on Earth, I feel like the less immediate people's engagement. If they're not shared immediately, then people don't feel the need to follow the mission day to day to day. You don't have that kind of momentum of excitement if you can't keep going to the web and see pictures coming in at all hours. Now, not every mission can do that. Juno is an example of a mission that only produces raw images once every few weeks. And so people understand the rhythm of that mission as well. There's a flyby rhythm to that mission where people tune in. They might even put on their calendars when the next flyby is going to be, and otherwise they don't actually spend as much time in the community discussing the images that have returned from the spacecraft. So here's a list that I could come up with about the missions that were providing raw images right away. I did not have the heart to delete Opportunity from this list because it's been my companion for so long, even though it did die a few years ago. But it began this whole thing as far as I'm concerned, and so I have to keep it up there. But Mars Express visual monitoring camera, Mars Express, all of Curiosity's cameras, the Juno camera. Sometimes when Hayabusa 2 was in the middle of sampling operations or other proximity operations, they would rapidly share their images to the web. Bepi Colombo's engineering cameras actually produce archival data within 10 days of acquisition. So that's pretty incredible and is a very fun thing to play with because you see lots of spacecraft motions in there. And the HiRISE camera on Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter also has very rapid archival data generation, which makes it very accessible to researchers and the public alike. And here's a list of some other recent ones. If I've missed any, actually, I would love to know what I've missed because I want to keep on top of all the missions that are sending raw images to the web. A lot of solar missions do this too. I'm less on top of what the solar missions are, but But yeah, a lot of the sun monitoring missions are also rapidly releasing their image data. And I think it's archival quality, although it's not strictly speaking an archival data set. It is the ping formatted, the full lossless version of the data that they are sharing. Okay, so what do these people want? They want raw images really fast. It's okay if they're compressed. It's okay if you have to reduce the resolution. Whatever you need to do to share it, just share it, because it helps this sense of immediacy of following along on the mission. Automatic contrast stretching is something that needs to be done, because most of these cameras are like 12 or 16-bit, and the images as generated are often very dark that way, so they have to be stretched. But some of the automated contrast stretches that have been applied to these data sets are not very good for mosaicing the data, because they produce too obvious seams, and it can be hard to color match between JSON tiles and a mosaic. So, but the community is resourceful and they can work around it. They need metadata. They want to know why images are taken, observation plans, end of sol reports. And there are enough people who know enough in these communities that there isn't any need to translate this kind of information for the public, because there are people out there who will do that translation for you, who will say, oh, I found this report and it says this, that, and the other thing, and what that means is blank. And so community members, experts can help the rest of the community interpret some of the more technically difficult data. Okay, so an example, I think an example, probably my favorite example of the kind of way that an expert has enabled access to data sets by a much broader community is this website and software called Midnight Planets that was created by a Minnesotan programmer named Mike Howard. And he had this data, he had this website that it basically scraped the Curiosity and Mars Exploration Rover websites for data, because there wasn't an API. And you were able to easily browse all the data. It produced these real-time VR where it would assemble all the images in a mosaic. It had the trajectory, the path that the rover traveled on his app that you can even just tap on the screen in order to navigate from point to point to point. And so many members of the fan community used this website, used this software to access the rover data. Unfortunately for the community, Howard recently left his tech job and tech work to become a Buddhist monk, and he's no longer updating Midnight Planets. And so now he's a volunteer, and he ran out of energy, really, and motivation to keep up his volunteering. So this is an example of a tool that it would be wonderful if we had more tools like this that were more supported by the professional community, that would enable broader access by the public. What do you get from these explorers? You get a lot from them if you help them out. You get up-to-the-minute situational awareness of what's going on in a mission. They're often faster to note the progress on a mission than professionals are, because after all, professionals have a lot of stuff on their plates and a lot of distractions. And people working on missions usually have other projects that they need to do, including spending a lot of their time asking for money. So here's just a quote from an interview of Steve Squires about this. He said, in the morning, the first place I go is Unmanned Spaceflight, because I know I'm going to get the mosaics there rather than just the raw images if I go through all the firewalls to get to the JPL website, because nobody in Pasadena has even woken up yet. And so this community can actually be really helpful and useful to professionals as they're watching the ongoing process of their mission. They also have encyclopedic background knowledge of what has happened in the past on the mission, because they've been following it closer than even many of the people who are active members of the mission team. They're very devoted, informed, and involved advocates for the mission. They'll write to Congress. They will answer questions online. They'll debunk internet conspiracies. My favorite one on the Mars exploration rovers was this Sasquatch on Mars. As you can see, it was posted on this website, Encounters with the Unexplained. And here's our friendly Sasquatch, the Bigfoot that was walking around on Mars. The unmanned spaceflight community quickly figured out that that Bigfoot was actually very tiny, only a few inches tall, and that Bigfoot was also not moving from one day to the next. He stayed still for about 3 or 4 days, and they found all the images of Bigfoot that have been taken through all of the different cameras on the Mars exploration rover. And so then because of all the work that the community did, I was able to write a blog post bringing this all together and explaining it. And then that blog post got reshared. So this debunking service was very useful for stopping, or not stop, or at least countering a story that was, I think, very annoying to a lot of people. You don't want to be a Mars researcher and be asked about Bigfoot on Mars. A slightly different debunking situation happened with this image of one of the lakes on Titan that was in a NASA press release. And somebody noticed that if you cranked up the contrast, you could see a lot of repeated art elements in this image. The image has clearly been touched up. It's been doctored. There's been stuff cloned in to that dark area. And I pointed this out to Photojournal, and they did take it down or replace it with one that had not had this doctoring applied to it. What had happened was the original image had been in somebody's DPS presentation. They hadn't been making it for press release, but it was in a presentation that they gave, and then somebody else on the mission said, "Hey, wow, that's a great image. Let's share it on Photojournal," and not realizing, perhaps not noticing the doctoring that had been done to it, the cloning in the dark areas. And so the community was able to rapidly identify the problem, explain it, try to get people less excited about conspiracy theories, and also bring it to the attention of somebody, me, who could contact the right people to get the problem fixed at Photojournal. So that's another kind of useful thing that happens. So unmannedspaceflight.com has come up a lot in this conversation, and unmannedspaceflight.com needs help. The original administrators who did the technical support have exited for various reasons. We need a technical administrator. We need a stable place. We actually need to change our URL because of the non-inclusive nature of the URL Unmanned Spaceflight. We have an existing very active and vibrant community. We have content moderators. There are lots of people who want to participate, but we need technical assistance. And again, this seems like an opportunity for Open Planetary. It could be a good fit to provide a home to this already existing community. And the community would then just continue to flourish, hopefully, with the help of Open Planetary. So I have a couple more success stories to share, but I also realize I've been talking way too long. So I think this is a good place for me to wrap up my presentation. I can stay on for a little while longer to answer questions. I don't have to stop at the top of the hour. So I just want to thank those of you who have stuck through my lengthy presentation, and I would welcome any questions either now or by email afterward. I'll fast forward to the very last slide of my presentation. And I can just give you my contact information there. I think I kept adding so many things to this presentation that I was too excited to talk about. So I couldn't stop talking. So please ask me questions.